Velkommen til Markedsføringspodden med Even og Eivind. Podcasten for deg som vil lære mer om salg og markedsføring.
Hver uke leverer vi deg våre beste tips som du kan ta i bruk i din bedrift for å øke synlighet og salget.
Hei og velkommen tilbake til Markedsføringspodden. Mitt navn er Even, og som vanlig sitter jeg med deg, Eivind.
Hallo, hallo.
Og denne gangen er du jo virkelig tilbake, ikke bare tilbake fra forrige uke. Nå har vi syndet litt på publiseringsopplegget her, og er noen uker bak skjema, men med litt flytting, sykdom og alt mulig annet rart, så ble det rett og slett bare sånn.
Ja, nå har det vært mye, så nå kommer disse hellige dagene i mai også, så det blir ikke lettere det her. Men vi er klare for å gi gass, vi nå.
Ja. Til gjengjeld så har vi en skikkelig godbit av en episode i dag. Vi skal snakke om laws of growth. Og for å gjøre det så har vi fått med oss en veldig spennende gjest. Det er Rick Lawrence. Han er kanskje for mange i Norge mest kjent for å ha vært markedssjef i Tine. Men før han var der så har han blant annet jobbet i Unilever, Nestlé, Heineken og Mondelez, og har jobbet i markeder i Europa, USA og Asia. Så dette er jo en fyr med grådig mye erfaring å jobbe med brand management og ikke minst hvordan vokse både kjente og nye merker.
Ja, han har mye erfaring, så det tror jeg blir veldig bra.
Og ikke minst, nå jobber han som konsulent, blant annet i norske Oslo Reklamebyrå. Og egentlig så tror jeg ikke vi trenger å si så mye mer. La oss bare sette rett over til praten vi hadde med Rick. Welcome to the show, Rick. First of all, you've been in marketing quite a while, but how did you get into this career?
Well, I didn't to start with. I think the most interesting thing perhaps is that my first job was as a graduate at Deloitte & Touche as a trainee accountant in auditing. So something deep inside told me I really, really want to be an accountant. And that lasted a couple of weeks, and then I resigned and realized I really don't want to be an accountant. And then applied to Unilever and joined the Unilever grad scheme as a marketing graduate. So I guess the first thing is I didn't. I wanted a proper job, I wanted a qualification, and I wanted a sensible future.
Yeah. Do you think your accounting background has influenced how you developed as a marketer?
No, I didn't stay long enough. I think it made me understand what I really like and what I really want, and that's to make a difference. And I didn't feel that understanding accounting code and understanding how to use Excel was the best way of doing that. Of course, I now use Excel a lot more, probably than I would if I was an auditor. But at the time, it was just more about wanting a career and not really understanding marketing as a career choice.
What kind of background education do you have, Rick?
So again, in the UK back then, very few people did business or commercial or marketing degrees. So you do a standard arts degree at as good a university you can. So I went to Durham and I studied theology, which to people outside the UK is crazy. Well, even some people in the UK is crazy. But it was an academic degree. And in the UK, the way it works is you do your 3 years and then you go straight into a graduate scheme. If you're doing accountancy, you go to an accountancy firm and they sponsor you through accounting school for 2 years. If you're doing law, you do a law conversion and then you join a law firm. Or you go straight into business like I did in the end when I joined Unilever. It's interesting. When I joined Tine, we had this moment where the job description for a junior brand manager said, you have to have a master's degree. And I was thinking, I don't even have a master's degree. I can't support advertising. You must have a master's degree. But it is cultural. And having lived overseas, now 7 or 8 years overseas, and in particular in Asia, everyone I worked with had a master's in Asia. So I'm very grateful now to have an MBA, but at the time, 25 years ago, it wasn't a thing in the UK.
Yeah, I think that's in like the marketing world as well, it's almost like a bit debated, depending a bit on what type of companies you are in, of course, whether education is good or bad.
Experience or education.
Yeah. Where do you land in that debate now?
I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both. But what I would say is it's clear, and maybe I'm saying this more as a parent than as a CMO or a marketing person. I think it's clear that different people learn in different ways and have therefore developed at different stages and in different ways. So for some people, it may be really easy to go to university and do a degree, do a master's, and do the traditional academic route. And for other people, it may not be. But it doesn't mean they're less. It just means they're learning in a different way, and the academic system hasn't picked up how best to accommodate those people. There are much better people than me to comment on this, but if you look at most of the entrepreneurs out there, the successful Richard Bransons or Elon Musks, all these people, traditional education, even Bill Gates, all of these people, traditional education hasn't been their friend.
Yeah, I think so. But yeah, most of them are like almost geniuses as well. So I think that helps if we're going to skip out on the education.
Helps a bit.
It does, yeah.
Yeah. But you mentioned that you have been in Asia as well. So you've been quite around the world. We are going to talk about your time in Norway soon, but how was it to get into Asia, and how was that different from the UK where you had your experience?
So it was great. I'm lucky. I've worked or been responsible for 18 different markets: US, Northern Europe, Southeast Asia. So very different from very big, established, modern markets like Singapore or the US even, through to very emerging markets or emerging economies like Indonesia and Philippines or Vietnam. So there's a lot of diverse differences between these types of markets, but there's also a lot of similarities. And I think what you take when you move from one country to the next is you try and look for the similarities that you can work with and try and identify the differences. In the case of Southeast Asia, one of the big differences was affordability and the type of retail. So I ran a biscuits business in Northern Europe, which was, selling Oreos and chocolate biscuits and things like this largely in supermarkets. And then I went to run the same business in Southeast Asia, and it's not so much supermarkets anymore. It's traditional trade or general trade. And this can be as small as a 1 meter by 50 centimeter window in someone's house, that you stand outside of. So the retailing reality and then how you interact with shoppers or consumers changes depending on those things. But the same things are true in that consumer wants something, has certain needs. They're often the same needs or wants, right, or similar. And they have an amount of money they're prepared to pay for it. And they're assessing you versus a competitive set. And these things are true whether you're in a massive hypermarket in the US or whether you're in a small window in the front of somebody's house in Manila.
Yeah. So would you say it's mostly like distribution that's different across the world, and the rest of the marketing mix is similar?
Of course, that there are cultural differences. Yeah. Working with teams and people is different. I work now. I'm still working with a client in Indonesia, and it was really important to me to go and meet the team face to face in Southeast Asia, and in particular in Indonesia. You have to win their hearts before their minds. So it was important to me to start this. I'm doing some mentoring in the marketing space. It was really important to start by meeting them face to face, and that's a cultural reference. That's all about the culture in Indonesia. If I was doing that I have clients here in the UK, 3 or 4 hours drive away. We can do it all on Zoom or on Teams.
Yeah. So when you got to Norway, first of all, how did you end up at Tine? It's far away from Asia, where you were at the time, from my understanding.
I got the call. I think I was in I was either in Jakarta or Saigon in an airport lounge when I got the call from the headhunter researcher. And I was probably tired and emotional after another trip away from home, away from my wife and kids, and thought it was good time to practice applying for a job and writing a CV. And once you start a process, you have to go in, with an open heart, with an open mind, and see where it goes. And in this process was really interesting. So the CEO was very clear on a challenge that the business faced. The X million dollars the business was spending every year on commercial activities, sales, marketing, commercial capex, and the declining market share. And they wanted someone to come in and do something which I thought was interesting.
Did you know anything about Norway from before?
No, well, yes and no. So we have some family members or godparents from Norway. So I know some Norwegian people, but I've never been to Norway. My dad had a number of holidays in Norway when I think he was in his teen years and as a student. So we have some connections, but I'd never been to Norway and didn't know anything much of Norway. I hadn't been to Malaysia or Southeast Asia before when I went there either.
Yeah, so obviously not an issue. What was some of the differences you noticed when you got here?
So again, there are differences culturally. There are differences in terms of the structure of industry. I think one of the surprising things for me was just how dominated most industrial sectors are in Norway by either a former monopoly, perhaps even former state-owned monopoly, or a privately owned competitor. There's not a lot of players in each segment. There's a few dominant players, typically former monopoly or privately owned. That's different. In the UK, most of the players would be international players, local division. So that's a difference. Culturally, with the teams and the people, it's uber democratic and uber inclusive. Certainly, much more so than Asia or the US, which is much more top down, set a direction for the team to follow. And the retail footprint, the retail stores are much smaller in Norway. So there's a store every few hundred meters, a Kiwi or a Rema, or there's lots of stores, but they're relatively small compared to most of Europe, which is still dominated by bigger store formats. So that's interesting.
So, coming to Tine, Norway's largest producer and distributor and exporter of dairy products, what was your role?
So I joined Tine as CMO and head of international markets. So two different roles. 3/4 of my time running the marketing function of the Norwegian business, very much a branded FMCG company. That was the approach. And then 1/4 of my time running the international business unit. So with the subsidiaries in the US, Sweden and the UK, and some exports to Germany, Australia, things like this.
So when you got to Tine, what were some of the things you changed during your time there?
Well, the main thing we changed was to try and move from kind of every brand manager, every junior brand manager, senior brand manager, doing everything their own way, to developing the Tine way. So that manifests itself in having, really simple things like the Tine brand, when I arrived, was still presented differently to consumers in different categories. So if you bought Tine milk, it would look different from Tine yogurt, and that would look different from Tine desserts, and so on. So trying to unify all the Tine elements into one Tine brand. So that was a change. We did things like develop a media strategy and a capability agenda so that we could support the team to develop in this consistent approach for the Tine way of building brands and building the business. And we tried to work really closely with sales, in particular Dagligvarer channel, really trying to develop one commercial plan, where previously there had been two separate plans. This is what sales are focused on. This is what marketing are focused on. We tried to develop one plan and had real success in that partnership with sales.
That sounds great. When you talk about the Tine way, is that some kind of like internal best practice that all Tine brands used, or?
Yes. So it was really a collection. We worked on it as a leader group, but of course it was heavily influenced by my experiences. So we took kind of the best of Tine plus the best of my experience at Unilever or Nestle or Heineken and Mondelez, and built a sort of playbook for the business, based heavily on laws of growth and Byron Sharp, of course, because since 2015, 2016, this has been a massive influence in marketing. But not only that, including some very practical tools like scene-by-scene objectives or creative idea assessment tools, things like this. And we built that playbook and then launched that playbook both to our marketing function as well as to some of our external partners.
Several of our Tine itself and several of its like sub brands are some of the most like beloved Norwegian brands and some of the highest rated ones. How was it the like feedback from people when you tried to go in and change parts of that? Was there a lot of backlash, or was that an easy process?
Oh, mostly very positive. I mean, if you look at Tine today through the eyes of a consumer, there are very few things they would notice. In the marketing world, there may be some things that people can point at, but in the real world, where consumers don't live and breathe your brand quite as much as we do in marketing, then there are very few things that they noticed, certainly negatively. I think the most obvious one, and I guess what you have in your mind, is the påskekrim situation where we took the crime cartoon thing off the front of the milk cartons, and there was I think mainly a journalist-led sort of negative noise around it. But all I would say to that, which actually wasn't my decision, ultimately my responsibility, but it wasn't my decision to take it. It's easy to blame the British person sitting at the top.
Yeah.
But, I'm accountable for it. But someone in the team was adamant to take it off. And in the end, it's now back on the side panel, I think, where it probably deserves to be. But the data is what's most important here. So what were the facts? The facts were, when we had påskekrim on the front of pack, it was harder to find Tine milk, harder to see the Tine brand, and it was not a driver of choice or market share. So when we took påskekrim off the pack, we did not lose share. We created a mess for the communications department to deal with,
Yeah.
and they found themselves on the news and having to justify the decision. But actually for consumers, whilst they like the påskekrim, it wasn't a determining factor for their brand choice. And this is the key. So when we talk about brand management, what we're really trying to do is run the brand for the business's benefit by getting the right balance right between what consumers want, what customers want, the retailers, and what's good for the company. So there are millions of examples. Probably the best example recently is the Toblerone example, which is another brand I worked on in my time at Mondelez. So Toblerone, really successful brand, really well known, but in the context of premium chocolate, very niche. So predominantly sold in airports and limited to one format. Mondelez were attacked by Ferrero and Lindt, who were growing in this premium chocolate segment globally, and they wanted to grow in those segments to compete against Ferrero and Lindt. But their challenge was, it was Swiss chocolate, and they didn't have a factory that could do the only thing they could make in Switzerland was these triangular chocolate bars. So what do you do? And for years, the business said, no, it's most important that it is Swiss. And we would have to take the Matterhorn logo off the pack if if we don't make 100% of Toblerone in Switzerland. In the end, they've made a decision that actually it's more important to be able to grow Toblerone and give consumers what they want, which is Toblerone pralines or Toblerone different formats, which means some Toblerone, only a small amount, but some Toblerone will now be made outside of Switzerland. The result, the Swiss authorities say you cannot use the Matterhorn iconography on your pack. Fine. Will consumers care? I don't think so. I think they'll be more interested in the exciting new Toblerone formats that they'll be able to buy and the new places they can find Toblerone. It won't be limited to duty-free and limited distribution in real stores in Dagligbara. It will find its way into more stores and more occasions, and I'm sure it will be a success. I had nothing to do with the decision, but I think it's a great example of where head over heart plays a role in building successful brands for a business.
Yeah, and that's something I think for a brand manager is very easy to like fall in love with your own brand, and you spend 40 hours on it every week, and people spend maybe 40 seconds in a year thinking about you if you're lucky. So it's very like easy to overestimate how much people care about all that kind of stuff.
I think that's where the laws of growth methodology is quite good, because the laws of growth methodology starts with this analogy of the leaky bucket. So I spent, and I think this is really important because, you know, a lot of people know that I'm an advocate of laws of growth and I support it, and that they can do what they want with that information. Some people like it, some people challenge it. I'm not here to defend laws of growth. That's Byron Sharp's job and the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. They can defend laws of growth. But I had a life before laws of growth. Actually, most of my career, 15 years of my career, I was a marketer trying to build brand love. I was trying to find consumers who looked like my loyal consumers today. And so a small pen portrait of a very targeted consumer group. And I was spending, believe me, millions of dollars. I mean, I've spent a really ridiculous amount of money trying to get people to fall in love with my brands over those 15 years. Typically $1 million for a TVC, typically 60 seconds or 90 seconds, typically buying bursts of media, all the things that laws of growth tells us, they just very clearly tell us do not work. That's what I spent 15 years of my career doing. So I completely empathize with that transition. I had no choice. I was lucky. I worked in a big American matrix organization. Laws of growth was done to me. And after about a year or two of having laws of growth done to me, I saw the benefits. But I had no opportunity to, it was either leave or get fired if I didn't follow laws of growth. So for me, it was a simple transition. And now I've seen the benefits and can talk to all the benefits of laws of growth. And that leaky bucket is the key for me. If we believe that our job is to go and find the consumer and get them to marry our brand and then they will never leave us, we're delusional, because life doesn't work like that. And every data point that's available points to the fact that doesn't happen. Consumers, shoppers walking down the aisle, they're using the aisle as a motorway to get from A to B. They're not actually going down the aisle because they want to see what wonderful chocolate innovation we've got. They're doing it because it's, that's where they need to go to get to the bread or to get to the milk or to get to the checkout. And if we can then get them to stop in the aisle and we can get them to pick up our products and we can get them to try it, well done, congratulations. Now do it all again tomorrow or next week, depending on what the purchase cycle is for your category. Don't celebrate too much, because just because you've got them to buy your brand once means nothing next week, because you don't know what your competitor's going to do next week. You don't know what their needs are next week. So you have to go again, and then you have to go again, and you never win. You've never won. It's a consistent, continuous battle to win that purchase decision. And that's a massive change in approach to marketing, which, like I said, I spent 15 years doing it the other way. So I understand that. I made some beautiful films, not very effective advertising, but I made some beautiful films. I delivered on the KPIs that were there at the time. Now moving forward, we've got to have that mindset to follow the laws of growth methodology that's proven by marketing science, to win every time that shopper is making a purchasing decision. That really does change your outlook.
Some of the critique of the laws of growth is that if everyone follows them, then it's no longer useful because you're doing the same as everyone else. What would you say to that?
Oh, I've not heard that critique before. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Is it? I don't really understand that critique. I've heard critiques that say if you follow laws of growth and you advertise to a broad audience and try and do as many weeks of advertising a year, then you limit yourself to shorter formats of advertising, and then you can't do storytelling and you can't do emotional advertising, which I think is proven to be nonsense by all the successful people who have developed, really great advertising ideas, like Specsavers, for example, who can do it with 0 seconds. They just sponsor a referee in a football match because their advertising idea is so clear. You can do it. You can use that advertising idea because it's so good, so based on human truth and a category need, that you can do that through sponsorship, or you can do it through a press ad, a print ad, a piece of PR, or a short form of TV. Or if you want to and you have all the budget and all the money coming out of your ears, you can do a 90-second cinema ad. But I think that it is a lot harder to develop strong creative than it is to develop a mood film. And I think that's really what's going on here.
Yeah.
And I've been, like I said, I spent 15 years predominantly developing branded mood films, which are then very difficult to make work in a short format. So I think that's what's the challenge for laws of growth when it comes to creative. Yeah.
We are talking a lot about advertising and marketing in the Norwegian market, obviously, in this podcast. And what do you think about marketing and advertising in the Norwegian market? How is it different to other places you have been?
I think
it's following the laws of growth.
Well, no, I think it's the same as everywhere. So there are great marketers everywhere, and Norway is no exception. And there's great advertising everywhere. I loved when we were working on the Christmas campaign for Tine. There was this great Rema 1000, the smart home Santa ad, which I thought was brilliant, and I loved their old campaign about the simple things being the best. So I think there's a lot of great advertising, of course. I think laws of growth is a challenging transition for all of us, and as marketers, it varies by industry, but as marketers, we have a number of challenges. We have stakeholders who want different things. When I worked at Heineken, we sponsored the Olympics. Okay, so we sponsored the London 2012 Olympics. Great deal. We did a pouring deal, so we were an official supplier. And what happens when you have the Olympics is the outdoor media that is within a certain number of kilometres of London is put in, or a venue, any of the Olympic venues, is put in an auction format, and it's released by tier. So tier 1 sponsors first can try and buy it to the highest bidder. Tier 2 sponsors, if it's unsold, tier 2 sponsors can buy it. Tier 3 sponsors can buy it. Tier 4 sponsors can buy it, then official suppliers, and then whatever's left goes to the open market. Okay, this is a standard Olympic media format. I'm sure it's consistent globally. Now, why was the media booked on? There's a road from Heathrow Airport, the biggest airport in London. There is a road called the M4. It goes from there towards the Olympic Stadium into central London. Why was the media purchased on the way into the stadium, but not on the way back from the stadium? Because the marketer's number one job buying this media was to satisfy the senior stakeholders of, for example, Samsung, who are flying into London Heathrow and going to watch the Olympics as tier 1 sponsors. Their motives and the drivers for booking that media was not effective marketing from a selling more phones and TVs perspective. It was effective marketing from a point of view of positioning the UK business to the global stakeholders within Samsung. And these things happen all over. And if you overlay the fact in Norway, you have these industrial dynamics, which I'm sure affects the behaviors. One industrial dynamic is former monopolies. You know, if you think that the consumers operate in behavioral loops, so you do something, it works, you get rewarded, you do it again. Or you don't, you do something different, right? In previously monopolies or companies that are very dominant in their markets, you keep doing what you've always done because you've always been rewarded for it. It's quite difficult to break out of what you've always done because it's always worked. Privately owned companies or companies, listed companies with a dominant private shareholder, which is the other dominant share of industry in Norway, what do? What the boss likes, because it's what has always worked.
Yeah.
And then the third type of company, international companies. Well, you know, I'm afraid international companies don't make very many decisions in Norway. So most of those decisions are made, you know, in Europe or Northern Europe, and very few of them have the offices in Norway. So it's quite difficult to drive change when you've got a habit loop which is rewarding today's behavior. And I'm sure that's a difficult thing to break out of in that Norwegian context.
Yeah, I think so too. That's definitely right. If you were, if someone listening to this is a brand manager in a brand or in an organization that might focus more on like brand love, but take this conversation as, okay, maybe it's time for me to start focusing on the laws of growth. How would you start that transition? Because that could be quite rough.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea first to try and not think of it as binary. You know, you can have popular brands that are really well liked, really well trusted. Like Tine, as an example. Of course, it helps that there was a health crisis with the pandemic, but Tine is super trusted as safe food. It is super well liked. And admired as a brand. Those things don't change because you try and have effective marketing. So I think there's a risk that people and the anti-laws of growthers out there will try and say that, you know, you either have emotional advertising or you follow laws of growth. You either have brands which people like and admire and trust, or you have laws of growth. It's not either or. It's both and. So how do you... I think that's the first thing. It's not either or. The second thing is just to try and think through the data which you have available. We're very lucky in marketing often, especially in bigger companies, to have a lot of data. And if we look at that data objectively, we can learn a lot about what we should be doing. So think about the core elements of laws of growth. That's that you should target your category buyers on a relevant time period and try and drive penetration through mental availability, physical availability, and always being distinctive. Now, that shouldn't be too scary. The challenge is being objective about it, so trying to look at the data and not making assumptions based on your hopes and dreams. But the reality is, if I take a chocolate brand, let's take Snickers, which I think is a really well-defined brand that makes great advertising, by the way, that's also short format and follows laws of growth, right? So Snickers as a Mars brand, I've never worked on it, so that's why I'm picking it. It's easier to be objective about someone else's brand that you've never worked on it. So how does a shopper interact with that? Well, first they've probably got a need, right? So either I'm hungry, I want a snack, I want to have a break, I want something filling, and there may be secondary needs, but there are probably some primary needs: personal reward, hunger, these kinds of things. Kit Kat also do very well. So the first thing they've done is the shopper has got a category need, a trigger, which is meaning they're going to buy it. Now, they may not have, it doesn't mean it's necessarily a planned purchase. I may not have gone into that shop because I'm hungry, but I am hungry and I'm in that shop. So then the job of Snickers, having decided they're going to own hunger, is to make sure that they own the headspace so that when someone thinks hunger, they're more likely to think Snickers than Mars or Skittles or Freya or Quick Lunch, right? So hopefully they've done a great job in their advertising through consistent advertising, hopefully weekly, to a broad audience of category buyers over a long period of time. So they own that headspace of hunger. And hopefully Snickers is then available in the right place, in the right part of the store, in the right pack size, at a price point that they're prepared to pay. And if possible, with any point of sale associating, making it more visible and associating with hunger even further. And hopefully, they've always been distinctive, so that by being continuous, by being reliable in the way they execute the brand, the logo isn't changing every 5 minutes, the advertising isn't changing every 5 minutes, they've built that distinctiveness, then I'm more likely to buy it. If, on the other hand, let's take the other scenario, if I associate, so old Snickers, so how they used to do Snickers, Snickers was positioned as a cool brand for teenage boys, which was full of nuts. Nothing to do with hunger, right? It was a teenage boy brand full of nuts. They advertised for 6 weeks and then were silent for, 20 weeks, and then they advertised for another 6 weeks. And then let's say that everything else in store is the same. The chances are, in those 20 weeks when there's no advertising, because I believe advertising can work, and the data says it can work, the chances are, if my choice is to have a shopper in a store with an association with a category trigger, having seen an advert recently, or a teenage, or limiting my audience to teenage boys in a store who haven't seen an advert for 20 weeks and don't associate the brand with a category trigger, which one of those do you think is more likely to be successful?
Yeah.
And that's where common sense comes in,
Yeah.
Because it's
Absolutely.
clear, there's more all adults than there are teenage boys. You're going to sell more if you associate with a category trigger, and you're going to sell more if you've seen the ad recently. And that's really the simplicity of laws of growth. Everything else is smoke and mirrors and propaganda to defend the ways people have done things in the past.
Yeah, I think that's a really good advice and a very good way to frame it for people as well, to understand why it's so important. So I think that's a good spot to end this conversation. Thank you so much, Rick, for sharing of your knowledge.
Yeah, thank you.
If people are listening to this and want to work with you or talk to you or connect in some way, what will be the best way for them to reach out?
You can email me at rick@osloreklamebyrå, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn and connect if that's easier.
Okay, perfect. Great. Thank you very much.
Tusen takk for at du hørte på dagens episode. Vi håper du har lært noe nyttig. Hvis du lærte noe, så hadde vi satt utrolig stor pris på om du kunne gå inn på iTunes og gi oss en anmeldelse. Det vil hjelpe oss veldig mye med å nå ut til flere som deg. Du kan abonnere på podcasten i Spotify og i iTunes. Du kan også melde deg på for å få en varsling for hver nye episode på markedsføringspodden.no. Har du et spørsmål eller et tema du vil ta opp på podcasten, så kan du sende det inn til oss på markedsføringspodden.no. Ha en fin dag.